Yeah. Sit right here. Just a lot of reports today. Many reports. So if you can choose side. These two sheets from NAS reports today. Good afternoon and welcome to the monthly and annual crop production, grain stocks, WASDE briefing. My name is Lance Honig and I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board at NAS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA to better understand the content and context of today's reports. We're very pleased to have Richard Fordyce, USDA's Undersecretary for Farm Production and Conservation, joining us as Secretary Designate today. We also welcome Dr. Justin Benavidez, USDA's Chief Economist. So welcome to both of you. Before I turn things over to our presenters, I do have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production, grain stocks, and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management and Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. OMB statistical policy instructs policymaking officials to refrain from making public comment regarding the content of these reports within 30 minutes of their release. Therefore, we will not be taking questions from the public during this briefing. Both NAS and World Board staff are available for phone or email questions, and NAS will host a social media event at 1:30 Eastern Time this afternoon. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy, always refer to the official published estimates. With that, I'll turn things over to Anthony Perlman. He is the acting chief of the NAS Crops Branch. Anthony will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, chair of the World Ag Outlook Board. Anthony.
All right, thank you, Lance, and good afternoon. I too want to welcome everyone who has joined us here today, as well as those who have dialed into the live stream. Now, as you can see from this opening slide, we've got 6 reports that we'll be covering in today's briefing, so we have a lot of information. I will try to get through this as quickly as possible, but as always, we will have time at the end of the briefings to answer any questions you too may have. All right, before we get into today's numbers, let's first look at the multiple data sources we use to establish the estimates in today's report. The slide is broken out into different sections to distinguish the different types of data we used. We'll start by looking at the 3 operator reported surveys we conducted. The first is our December agricultural survey, which is a farmer reported survey. The sample size was just over 73,000, with data collection running from December 4th through the 27th. Now, for this survey, farmers are asked to report the acreage, yield, and production data for the row crops and hay they produced in 2025 and their winter wheat they have seeded or will seed for the 2026 crop year. They also report the grain and hay stocks they have stored on their operation as of December 1st. Now, in order to get a complete account of all grain stored in the U.S., we also conducted the All Farm Grain Stock Survey, which accounts for all grain stored in commercial facilities. There are approximately 7,800 of those facilities across the country, and we collected data from them between November 29th and December 19th. Now, in support of the cotton estimates we released today, we also conducted our cotton ginning survey. Now, for this survey, we contacted 479 gins, which represents all known active gins for the current crop season. Data collection occurred between December 29th and January 5th. And then for this survey, the gins report the number of bales gin to date from the 2025 crop and an estimate of how many more they expect to gin through the end of the season. Now, throughout the 2025 growing season, we also conducted our corn and objective yield surveys. Now, for this survey, instead of surveying farmers, we surveyed nearly 3,100 corn and soybean fields in the major producing states. We sent trained enumerators into the fields who made measurements and took counts on a monthly basis throughout the growing season. Once harvest began, the enumerators monitored their assigned fields to make sure they made one final visit to take counts and harvest samples that were then sent to the NASS Objective Yield Lab for analysis. Now, information from that final visit is used in combination with the farmer reported data to establish final yield estimates of the season. Now, we also conducted the citrus objective measurement survey in Florida to collect fruit size and drop data in approximately 1,250 groves during the month to help estimate production in that state. And then lastly, in addition to all our survey work, we also utilized USDA administrative data from both FSA and RMA to determine if we needed to revise our previous planted and harvested acreage estimates for the row crops that are included in today's reports. All right, quickly, this map just shows how the 73,000 December ag samples we discussed on the previous slide are distributed across the U.S. Now, as you can see, the larger sample sizes represented by the darker shade of orange are in the nation's major crop producing states. Now, before we look at the individual crops, we like to start by looking at the principal crops total to see that big picture of what happened across all the crops this past year. Now, this total is simply the sum of the 22 major crops that are listed in that blue box at the bottom of the slide. Now, based on our current estimates, the planted principal crops total for 2025 is estimated at 311.5 million acres. This is up 0.2% from our previous published estimate back in June, which was the last time this specific total was published. However, as you may know, we made acreage updates in both August and September this past year based on all available data at that time. That would include USDA administrative data to ensure our acreage numbers were as accurate as possible, as early as possible. Now, since this total is simply a sum of those 22 individual crops, the change between today's number and the June published number may show an increase of 702,000 acres. However, if you compare today's numbers to the sum of the 22 crops leading into this report, the increase is actually 182,000 acres since we did make those acreage changes earlier this season. And then lastly, looking at year-over-year changes, principal planted acres are down 0.1% from 2024, whereas harvested acres are up 0.6%. All right, looking at principal crop acres graphically across the past 10 seasons, you can see how 2025 compares historically. Next, we'll look at principal crops total by state. And let me give an overview of how to read this map since we will use this same layout throughout the presentation. The top number in each state represents the value as indicated in the title. Now, for this map, that is the state's principal crops planted total for 2025. The bottom number represents the percent change from the previous crop year. So this map is comparing back to 2024. States colored in blue are showing an increase from the previous year, whereas states colored in red are showing a decrease. And then the darker the shade, the greater their percent change. Any states colored in gray are unchanged from the previous year. Now, if you see a pound sign beside the top number, that represents a record high for that state, whereas an ampersand represents a record low. Now, for 2025, record highs were reported in Alaska and North Dakota, while Alabama, Connecticut, Georgia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, and South Carolina estimated record lows this year. All right, let's now take a look at today's estimates. We'll start with corn. Planted acreage at 98.8 million acres is up 0.1% compared to the previous estimate and up 8.7% from 2024. This represents the highest planted area since 1936. Harvested area for grain is estimated at 91.3 million acres. That's up 1.3% or 1.21 million acres from the previous forecast and 9.9% higher than last season. This represents the highest harvested area since 1933. The 2025 average yield is estimated at a record high 186.5 bushels per acre. That is up 0.3% or half a bushel from the previous estimate and up 4% or 7.2 bushels from the previous year. Production is estimated at just over 17 billion bushels. That is up 1.6% from our previous forecast and up 14.3% from 2024. And this too represents a record high for the U.S. And then lastly, the bottom table on this slide shows the top 5 corn producing states in 2025 and how acreage, yield, and production compared to the 2024 season. Now, I will point out that all 5 states listed in this table recorded record high corn production in 2025. All right, looking at the average U.S. yield over the past 30 seasons with the trend line plotted, you can see how the 2025 record yield of 186.5 bushels compares to the previous seasons and trend. The 2025 yield represents the 3rd consecutive year of increasing yields and is above trend. All right, this map is comparing the 2025 yields to 2024 by state. You can see those year-over-year changes. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of blue on this map, indicating that most states had better yields in 2025 compared to the previous season. Now, I do want to point out that the 2 largest corn-producing states of Iowa and Illinois actually had slightly lower yields in the previous season, mainly due to weather and disease pressure. However, both states reported record high corn yields in 2024, and the 2025 yield still represents the 2nd highest yield on record for both states. So even though yields are down in those 2 large states from the previous season, they were still very good yields this year. And then speaking of good yields, you will also notice record highs in Georgia, Indiana, Louisiana, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. All right, this chart shows U.S. corn production over the last 10 seasons so that you can see how this past year's estimated production of 17 billion bushels compares to the previous 9 years. Now, to put this record production in perspective, it is nearly 11% higher than the previous record of 15.3 billion bushels that was produced in 2023. All right, let's now look at how today's NASS production estimate compares to pre-report industry expectations. For this chart, each blue dot represents an individual industry member's published expectation of corn production. The red square represents the NASS production estimate of 17 billion bushels. Now, as you can see, the NASS estimate falls well above what folks were expecting. And now looking through the expectations, it looks like the biggest surprise will be with the increase in harvested acreage, since most did not anticipate that change. All right, next we'll look at soybeans. Planted acreage at 81.2 million acres is up just 0.1% compared to the previous estimate, but down 6.9% or 6 million acres from what was planted in 2024. Harvested area is estimated at 80.4 million acres. That's up 0.2% from the previous forecast, but 6.7% lower than the previous season. The 2025 average yield is estimated at a record high 53 bushels per acre. That's unchanged from our previous forecast back in November, but up 4.5% or 2.3 bushels from the previous season. And then production is estimated at 4.26 billion bushels. That's up 0.2% from the previous forecast, but down 2.6% from 2024 due to that reduction in harvested acreage. Here's how the 2025 record high soybean yield compares to previous seasons. Like we saw earlier with corn, this is the 3rd consecutive year of increasing yields, and the yield is above trend. Now, looking at the soybean yields by state and how they compare to the previous season, it's more of a mixed bag compared to what we saw with corn. Good growing conditions in the Western Corn Belt, especially early in the season, led to record highs in many states. However, parts of the eastern U.S. reported lower yields compared to 2024. States recording record high soybean yields in 2025 included Arkansas, Georgia, Iowa, Kansas, Minnesota, Mississippi, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. All right, this next chart shows how the 2025 production estimate of 4.26 billion bushels compares to the previous 9 seasons. Looking at today's soybean production forecast and how it compares to industry expectations, you can see that it is within the range of expectations, but higher than most had anticipated. All right, moving on to cotton. Planted acreage at 9.28 million acres is down just 0.1% compared to the previous estimate, and down 17% compared to what was planted in 2024. We'll note this is the lowest planted area since 2015. Harvested area is estimated at nearly 7.81 million acres. That is up 5.9% or 436,000 acres from the previous forecast, but down just fractionally from 2024. Now, the reason you see virtually no change in harvested acreage between 2025 and 2024, but a fairly sharp decline in planted acreage is due to less abandonment this past year, mainly in Texas. Total abandoned acres in 2025 were the lowest since 2021. The 2025 average yield is estimated at 856 pounds per acre. That is down 77.9% or 73 pounds from the previous forecast, and down 3.4% or 30 pounds from the previous year. And then production is estimated at 13.9 million bales. That is down 2.5% from the previous forecast and down 3.4% from 2024. Now, comparing the 2025 cotton yield to previous seasons, you see a different story than what we saw with both corn and soybeans. This represents the third consecutive year of declining yields, and the 2025 yield is below trend. Now, looking at the year-over-year cotton yield changes by state, you see most states are up compared to 2024. However, the largest producing state of Texas, as well as Missouri, New Mexico, Tennessee, and Virginia, all reported lower yields this year. However, several states did report record high yields in 2025, including Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Louisiana, and North Carolina. Now, in terms of production, you can see how the 2025 production estimate of 13.9 million bales compares to the previous 9 seasons. Now, comparing today's cotton production forecast to industry expectations, you can see that it's within the range, but lower than most had anticipated. All right, we do have quite a few other crops in today's reports, and I'll move through these fairly quickly. Canola production is down 4.4% from the previous season, but still represents the second largest total on record. The 2025 yield is a record high. Chickpea production is up 20.2% from 2024 and represents the highest production since 2018. Dry edible bean production is down 14.2% compared with the previous season. Dry edible pea production is up 8.5% and is at the highest level since 2020. Flaxseed production is up sharply from the previous season due to both increases in acreage and yield compared to 2024. All hay production at 123 million tons represents the third consecutive year of increasing production. Now, for alfalfa hay, the 2025 average yield of 3.42 tons per acre is the highest since 2016. The other hay yield at 2.09 tons per acre is identical to 2024, and both represent a record high for the U.S. Looking at hops, harvested acreage at 41,700 is the lowest since 2014, and production is the lowest since 2015. Lentil production in 2025 is the highest since 2016, while both planted and harvested area are the highest since 2017. Mustard seed production is down nearly 31% from the previous season due to a reduction in acreage. Now, looking at peanuts, production at 7.18 billion pounds represents a record high for the U.S. Georgia, which is the largest peanut producing state, also recorded record high production in 2025. Peppermint production is up 4.8% from 2024 due to an increase in yield. Harvested acreage is unchanged from the previous season. Both planted and harvested acreage for potatoes are record lows for the U.S., but the 2025 yield represents a record high. Proso millet production at 14.2 million bushels is up 1.3% from the previous season, and the average yield is the second highest on record. All right, rapeseed planted and harvested acreage as well as production are all record highs in 2025. Looking at rice production at nearly 207 million hundredweight is down 7.1% from the previous season. Yields in all 6 estimating states were down from 2024. Safflower production is up 8.1% from the previous season due to an increase in yield. However, both planted and harvested acreage are record lows. Sorghum production is up 27% from 2024. Both acreage and yield is up from the previous season. Spearmint production is up 18.5% from 2024. 2025 sugar beet yield and production are the highest since 2021. Sugarcane harvested acres, yield, and production are all the highest since 2020. Louisiana reported record high harvested acres and production in 2025. Sunflower production in 2025 is up sharply from the previous season. However, the 2024 production was a record low, so kind of rebounding from that low year. And then lastly, tobacco, even though harvested acreage is up 3.3% from the previous season, it still represents the second lowest level on record. All right, let's now pivot from the 2025 season and look at the winter wheat planted area for the 2026 season. Planted acreage is estimated at nearly 33 million acres. That is down 0.5% or 163,000 acres from 2025. And this would be the lowest planted area since 2020. Now looking at U.S. winter wheat planted acres graphically across the past 10 years, you can see how this year's planted estimate compares historically. Now our first forecast of harvested acreage will be published in May. All right, this map shows the year-over-year changes in winter wheat planted acres. Now, as you can see, most states are down from 2025, but we do see increases in the Southern Plains, as well as a few other areas of the U.S. Now, I will point out that both California and Nebraska are estimating record low winter wheat acres in 2026. Now, comparing today's winter wheat planted estimate to industry expectations, you can see that it is within the range, but higher than most had anticipated. All right, that wraps up the crop production estimates we released today. Let's now transition over to grain stocks, and we'll start with all wheat stocks. Now, as a reminder, December represents the second quarter of the marketing year for wheat and the other small grains. Now, as of December 1st, all wheat stocks totaled 1.68 billion bushels. That is up 6.5% from the same time last year. On-farm stocks are down 4.4% year over year, while the off-farm portion is up 11.2%. All right, this next graphic gives a nice visual of what's happening with the crop over the marketing season. Now, the blue vertical bars represent the beginning supply for each crop year, and then the 4 horizontal lines represent the 4 quarterly stock estimates we publish during the season. Now, for this chart, the orange line represents the December quarter. Now, looking at the beginning supply of 2.84 billion bushels, that is up 6.1% from the previous season and the highest level since the 2020-2021 season. Then the September to November disappearance of 459 million bushels is up 9.3% from the same period a year earlier. Now, the all wheat stock estimates falls within the range of expectations, but is higher than most had anticipated. All right, next we'll look at December 1 corn stocks, which represents the first quarter or beginning stocks quarter of the marketing year. As of December 1st, total stocks are estimated at 13.3 billion bushels. That is up 10% from the same time last year and the highest December 1 stocks level on record. On-farm stocks are up 13.5% from the previous December and also represents a record high level, while all-farm stocks are up 3.9%. This chart is very similar to the one we looked at for wheat, but now that orange line that represents December is at the top of the chart since this is the beginning stocks quarter for corn. The beginning supply of corn for 25-26 crop year at 18.6 billion bushels is 11.5% higher than the 24-25 beginning supply, and the September to November disappearance of 5.29 billion bushels is up 15.5% from the same period a year earlier. All right, now today's corn stock estimates is technically within the range since there is a blue dot just above the NAS estimate. I know it's kind of hard to see, but there is a blue dot behind the red square, but it is higher than most were expecting. All right, moving on to December soybean stocks, which like corn represents the beginning stocks quarter of the marketing year. As of December 1st, total stocks are estimated at 3.29 billion bushels. That is up 6.1% from the same time last year. On-farm stocks are up 2.3% from the previous December, while off-farm stocks are up 9.9%. Now, the beginning supply of soybeans for 25-26 at 4.59 billion bushels is down 2.8% from the prior season. The September to November disappearance of 1.3 billion bushels is down 19.8% from the same period in 2020. All right, now today's soybean stock estimate should not be a surprise since it falls within the range of expectations. Now, we also released our December rice stocks report today, which shows December 1 rough rice stocks totaling nearly 137 million hundredweight. That is down 2.5% from December 2024. On-farm stocks are down 8.9% from the previous December, while off-farm stocks are up 0.2%. Now, the beginning supply of rice for 25-26 at 251 million hundredweight is down 1.6% compared with the previous season. The August to November disappearance of 114.6 million hundredweight is down 0.6% from the same period a year earlier. All right, next we'll look at the December 1 hay stock estimates. Now, as a reminder, each year NAS publishes hay stock estimates as of December 1st and May 1st. The December 1 hay stocks are estimated at 81.7 million tons. That's up 0.2% from the December 2024 estimate. Disappearance from May 1st, 2025 through December 1st, 2025 totaled 65.5 million tons. That is up 6% from the same period a year earlier. Now, quickly, this map just highlights the December 2025 hay stocks by state. Compared to the same time in 2024, we'll note a record low December 1 hay stocks was estimated in Rhode Island. All right, let's now look at some of the other commodities that were published in today's grain stocks report. Barley stocks at nearly 121 million bushels are up 3% from the same period in 2024. Chickpea stocks are up 16.6% from the previous year. Dry edible pea stocks are up 33.1% and represent the highest December 1 level since 2020. Durum wheat stocks at 61.1 million bushels are up 8.1%. Lentil stocks are up 94.7% and represent a record high December 1 total. Oat stocks are up 7.4% from December 2024 and are the highest December total since 2020. And then lastly, sorghum stocks at nearly 268 million bushels are the highest December stock since 2021. All right, we also released our first citrus forecast for the 2025-2026 season today. Now, as a reminder, our first forecast of the season is normally published in October, but due to the lapse in federal funding, that data was not released. Looking at the numbers, all orange production is forecast at nearly 2.4 million tons. That's up 0.2% from the previous season. Looking at non-Valencia orange production, it is up 20,000 boxes from last season. Now, because of rounding the tonnage, it's showing that it's equal to last year here on the slide, but again, just a minor uptick in non-Valencia orange production this year. Looking at that by state, production in California and Texas is expected to be up from 2024, but down in Florida. Valencia varieties are expected to be up 0.8% from the previous season. Grapefruit production is forecast at 311,000 tons. That is up 4% from the previous season. Both California and Texas production is forecast to be up 200,000 boxes from last year. Florida production is forecast down 100,000 boxes. If realized, this will be the third lowest production on record for that state. Lemon production at 1.08 million tons is down 2.6% from last season. Production in California is forecast to be down 800,000 boxes, whereas Arizona and Florida production are both expected to be up 30,000 boxes. And then lastly, tangerine production at nearly 1.1 million tons is down 10.1%. The expected decline is all due to a reduction in California. Florida production at 400,000 boxes is equal to what was produced last year and represents a record low level for that state. All right, this slide just highlights a few of the upcoming reports we will be releasing over the next few weeks. January 23rd, cattle on feed and cotton ginnings. On January 30th, we're releasing our agricultural prices as well as our cattle and sheep and goats. February 2nd will be the day we release our next CARES report, and then we'll be back here on February 11th for another crop production report as well as another cotton ginnings. Now, as a reminder, on February 19th and 20th, the USDA will be holding the 102nd Annual Agricultural Outlook Forum at the Crystal Gateway Marriott Hotel in Arlington, Virginia. This will be a hybrid event, and information pertaining to registration will be coming soon. As mentioned earlier, Lance will be on X at 1:30 today for Stat Chat, answering any questions about the numbers in today's reports. So this concludes today's NASS briefing. As a reminder, today's reports and all NASS reports and data can be found on our website. So I will now turn it over to Mark, who will cover the WASDE.
All right, I'm gonna keep things moving here and walk you through the WASDE report. Couple highlights, some things just to note here. Obviously, you saw from the last speaker a lot of information we got this morning, all of which is being incorporated into today's discussion, into the balance sheets for the domestic balance sheets. Also a lot going on internationally, but one area that we're going to highlight a bit today is Brazil. Soybean production in particular set to hit a new record high there. So let's start out with wheat production. Global wheat production up this month, 4.4 million tons, led by a big increase in Argentina. That crop is about 90% harvested now. Record yields, that'll be record production, and that record is up about 24% from the previous record. So it's really a massive crop there. Ideal growing conditions and high record yields. The other countries, Turkey, that's down 1 million tons. That's just based on some post reporting. We also raised Russia's wheat production forecast 2 million tons. That is based off of Rostat data, so data from Russia. And China, a small change there based on information recently released by China's National Statistics, NBS. Global balance sheet. We talked about production up, total supplies up 4.3 million tons. Then on the use side, feed use raised 200,000 tons. That is mainly higher feed use in Russia, Argentina, and Ukraine. And then global wheat trade, we raised 1.1 million tons. That is mainly higher exports out of Argentina, reflecting that big crop there, and also higher exports from Kazakhstan. On the other hand, that more than offsets lower exports out of Ukraine and the EU. Ukraine's exports were lowered in particular based on slow pace of shipments and conflict, Black Sea conflict impeding some of the shipments there. So with their lower exports, that's why we're also anticipating higher feed use in Ukraine. And finally, global ending stocks up 3.4 million tons. That is mainly in Argentina, again, reflecting the large crop there. And Russia, we're looking at record levels of wheat stocks in Russia. So now moving on to the U.S. balance sheet. Beginning stocks up a little bit. That's just based on the stocks report information we got this morning, June 1 stocks revision there, leading to that small increase in total supply, just 4 million bushels. Feed and residual use reduced 20 million bushels. That's again based on implied disappearance from the stocks report. And we're left then when adding up the different sides of the balance sheet there, we're left with ending stocks up 25 million bushels. So and with both US and global ending stocks raised this month, that is consistent with weaker prices. We lowered the season average market price 10 cents per bushel. And we've got about 70% of that crop marketed as of now. Moving on to rice, pretty small changes here in terms of global rice production, mainly reflecting just government data. So Bangladesh, that increase is based on information from Post. China, again, NBS data, recently received National Bureau of Statistics, and increase in Japan, also just based on Post reporting. Global rice balance sheet. Beginning stocks up this month. That is mainly higher stocks in India, as we lowered India's export forecast, where they're just based on a slow pace, despite the fact that they removed most of their export restrictions. That their export pace has just not been keeping up with our expectations. Trade, global rice trade up 300,000 tons, mainly reflecting higher exports from China, where they've been doing a lot of business to sub-Saharan Africa. And that more than offsets a reduction in rice exports by Pakistan based on the slow observed pace. Ending stocks up 1.5 million tons, and that's spread across many countries, including India, China, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Japan. Although, as you'll see on the next slide, US stocks are down slightly this month. US balance sheet, production down 600,000 hundredweight based on the NAS production report. Imports, we reduced 1 million hundredweight. That's all long grain, and that's based on just observed pace coming in slower than we expected relative to last year's pace. And domestic use up 5 million hundredweight, again based on implied disappearance from the stocks report that we received this morning. And exports, we lowered 3 million hundredweight. Again, all long grain there, and it's slow US sales and shipments, especially to Western Hemisphere markets. Stocks tighten up a little bit, down 3.6 million hundredweight this month. And the season average price, all rice price, we raised 20 cents per hundredweight, and that is actually all an increase in southern medium short grain rice. So moving into corn, global corn production up strongly this month, 13.1 million tons, and virtually all of the changes this month are just US and China. Large production increases in the world's two largest corn producing countries, US and China. And China there again, NBS data. That's we're looking at record production in China, and as you just saw from the previous presentation, record production in the US as well. So in terms of the global corn supply and use balance sheet, beginning stocks up 1.3 million tons based on, that's US, based on the grain stocks report, and also up a bit in Argentina as well. Total supply up, again, as I mentioned, that's really all the US and China. Feed use up, that's again mainly US, reflecting that larger crop, and some Argentina as well. And that increase in global ending stocks is also higher stocks in both the US and China. So speaking of the US, going into that into a little bit more detail, beginning stocks up 20 million bushels, grain stocks report driving that adjustments. And then a big increase in production, 268 million bushels based on this morning's reports. Feed and residual, we raised 100 million bushels, and that's based on implied disappearance again from those December 1 stocks. Food, seed and industrial down just a bit, 10 million bushels. That's lower use for glucose and dextrose, just based on observed industry data there. And when we add it all the way through the balance sheet, we're increasing ending stocks almost 200 million bushels, 198 million bushels to over 2.2 billion bushels of ending stocks, 13.6% stocks to use ratio. Average market price, we actually raised this month 10 cents per bushel. Shouldn't read too much into that based on the rest of the balance sheet, but really we're catching up on data that released since the shutdown and observed prices that we've seen since then. So current season average farm price for corn set at $4.10 per bushel. All right, let's move into soybeans. Here again, it's mostly a US and Brazil story. So global soybean production raised 3.1 million tons. And most of that, as you can see, is the majority of that increase is in Brazil, which I noted at the beginning of my presentation. I talked a little bit more about. And we'll talk about the United States toward the end of this discussion. And again, China reduced based on NBS data. But let's go into a little bit more detail on Brazil, where we're looking at the record crop there. This is just a map of the main production regions within. As you can see, the soybean production spread across most of the country. The biggest producing area, Mato Grosso. Just kind of for your background information, the harvest harvest begins in the center west area, and then as the season progresses, it moves south. So it's up here, Mato Grosso, northern Mato Grosso, where the harvest is just beginning, where soybeans are mature, and then that harvest will continue down to Rio Grande do Sul. Into early summer. And what we've seen throughout the growing season, so these are just what we call rainfall traces. They show cumulative precipitation over time. That black line shows average typical precipitation, cumulative over time. The green line shows last year's precipitation, and the red line is 2026, the current season rainfall trace. As you can see, again, this is the main, largest producing region of Brazil. Rainfall, the season got off to kind of a slow start, a little bit of a delayed start to the rainy season, but then when it started, we got very timely rains that essentially followed the same pattern as what you would expect a typical average year to be. So again, a late start, but then the rains were very timely and beneficial when they came. So good conditions overall. Going a little bit further south and east from Mato Grosso, Goiás, here too, you'll see 2026 really pretty closely following the typical rainfall pattern. So good timely rains supporting a good production outlook there. Going even a little bit further south into Paraná, Very, very abundant, favorable rainfall conditions there. So good rainfall supporting a positive production outlook. And also worth noting that the temperatures have been very benign, near average. This is for December averages. You see a lot of zeros there, meaning these are departures from normal. So basically normal temperatures through December. And this was consistent throughout most of the growing season across Brazil. So importantly, no heat stress. Plenty of moisture, no heat stress leads to a positive outlook for soybean production. And here I just put up some data on the NDVI. And you can see from period November 25th through December 2nd, generally favorable, but a little bit, see, some brown areas, a little bit more brown, but by the time we get into the most recent run, into early January, green conditions, meaning favorable throughout nearly all of the main growing areas of Brazil. So all this to say, things are really lining up for a favorable, very favorable production outlook for Brazil. Record area, record production, near record yields, and we'll continue to watch those yields as harvest continues. Still very early for the southern part of the country, but so far conditions look good, and the weather outlook looks good to continue as well. But we'll continue to watch that as the season progresses. So in terms of the global soybean supply and use balance sheet, virtually all of the discussion here today, changes here today are reflecting Brazil and the US. Production up 3.1 million tons. Again, that's mainly the Brazil and the US. Crush, we raised 1.2 million tons. That is also reflecting a higher crush forecast for Brazil, reflecting their record production, and higher crush in the US as well, which we'll get into on the next slide. Global soybean trade down just a bit, 100 million tons, and that is dominated by reduced exports by the US, which more than offset higher exports from Brazil. And ending stocks up 2 million tons, and again, that's higher stocks in both Brazil and the US. So regarding the US balance sheet, again, the adjustments to beginning stocks and production, ultimately total supply, reflecting the reports we got from NASS this morning, production and stocks. We raised crush 15 million bushels based on higher meal domestic disappearance, and exports, supporting some strength in the crush outlook there. Exports, US soybean exports, we lowered 60 million bushels this month, just reflecting the fact that we're looking at record production out of Brazil and higher exports from Brazil as well, crowding out some of the US export opportunities there. And US ending stocks raised 60 million bushels. And with that, maybe not too surprising, we lowered the season average market price 30 cents per bushel, now down to $10.20 per bushel, still up about 20 cents per bushel year over year. And now I'm going to talk just a little bit about the soybean oil, US soybean oil supply and demand balance sheet. A couple important things here to note. In terms of soybean oil production, we lowered our production forecast by 210 million pounds, despite the fact, as you just saw, we raised crush And this is just reflecting the fact extraction rates are coming in lower than expected, based on early season indications. So higher crush, but lower extraction rates, meaning a reduction in soybean oil production. The other important point or factor to point out here is biofuel use. Soybean use for biofuel. We reduced 700 million pounds based on pace to date, slower than expected pace to date, and the fact that we're seeing a lot more tallow coming in used for biofuels, substituting perhaps for some of that soybean oil. Still, despite this month's changes, big increase in soybean oil use for biofuels year over year, up about 3 billion pounds. And that is mainly driven by the current proposed RVO. And exports, soybean oil exports raised 300 million pounds here. You know, as we're using slightly less domestically, we're exporting more. And we made no change to our season average market price. All right, let's move into cotton. A few things we'll talk about the U.S. in a minute. Down about 350,000 bales. The other changes to point out: China. China's cotton production, we raised 1 million bales again this month. We've been raising that estimate for some time. This will be the second year in a row of record cotton production in China. And this is mainly in their primary cotton area, the Xinjiang area, where they've had 2 years of just nearly, really, maybe not nearly, absolutely ideal growing conditions, supporting production there. So now looking at a new record, 34.5 million, 34.5 million bales for China. And other changes for the other major producers, relatively minor. Argentina, that was adjusted based on data from Ministry of Agriculture. India down a bit. They had some rain in October. And then industry data suggesting some reductions there. Again, back to China. Right now, this is still based on government data and industry data within China, but next week we'll start to get classings data from China, which will provide a measure of ground truth to be able to get a better assessment of the size of that crop. Global balance sheet for cotton. That reduction in beginning stocks, that is an adjustment to India's stocks. Consumption, as you can see here, no change year over year in global consumption. Although this month we did raise consumption up about 300,000 bales. China's consumption, we raised 500,000. So then there were some minor offsets, but looking at higher consumption in China, and that maybe not too surprising given the record production we're expecting there. And global ending stocks this month lowered by 1.5 million bales. So for the U.S., as I noted, and as you saw from the previous presentation, U.S. production down 350,000 bales. That's the NAS data. And we didn't make any changes to our domestic use or export forecast. So for the most part, that just tightens up ending stocks by nearly the same amount. Small adjustment to unaccounted there as well. So 300,000 bale reduction in ending stocks. Season average market price, we raised this month by a penny a pound, reflecting some recent relative price strength, as well as these tighter stocks that we're seeing this month. Still year over year, cotton prices down about 2 cents per pound. All right, moving into sugar. I put up the back year here, 2024, 2025, just to point out some pretty small changes in some of the data revisions that FPAC made to the SMD data. Imports lowered 23,000 short tons, and that primarily reflects lower imports of molasses for further refining. And that so that shows up here as lower high tier imports. And that also carries into the new crop year as well. Again, that 31,000 ton reduction in high tier imports for the new crop year is reflecting a lower than expected imports of molasses for further refining. So on the back here, again, no change in ending stocks. So beginning stocks for the new crop year are unchanged. Sugar production up 39,000 tons this month. Beet production up 4,000 tons. That is based on the data we got from NASS this morning. Cane production raised 35,000 tons. That's mainly processor reporting out of Louisiana, seeing good yields and new area. Louisiana is now the largest producing state for U.S. sugarcane, passing out Florida. So that's something worth noting. Other changes here to the balance sheet, reduced minor for the out year. TRQ imports reduced 3,000 tons. Just some end of year accounting there, since TRQs are allocated on a calendar year. If it didn't come in by December 31st, it's not going to come in. So that is that small adjustment for the 2025, 2026 crop year. And ending stocks this month raised 55,000 short tons. Exports also reduced 50,000 short tons, and that is just reflecting the fact that Mexico, which we'll talk about here, is importing less sugar. They simply don't need it. They have plenty of supply in Mexico. They don't need the imports, and so they're going to be importing less from the U.S. Mexico production lowered 47,000 tons this month, mainly reflecting reduced area in Mexico. They've had extensive flooding, which delayed harvest, which is delaying harvest. They're actually off to the worst start to harvest ever in Mexico. So that we'll continue to monitor that. That could have further impacts on production down the line. Exports up just a bit. That's all to third countries. The export limit to the U.S. was set back in July. And domestic use for Mexico lowered 152,000 short tons this month. All right, that wraps things up for crops. Now we're going to quickly talk about some of the meat and dairy changes we made to the balance sheet. Starting out with beef, and again, now we're shifting to calendar years here, so 2025 and 2026. 2025 nearly complete, but it'll be another month or so before we have complete data for all of those balance sheets for last year. But starting out with beef, lowered our, you can see the increased production forecast for beef for 2025, slight increase mainly reflecting higher weights, which more than offset lower placements. And those higher weights we expect to carry into 2026, again, more than offsetting expectations of lower placements into 2026, all adding up to fairly small changes in the beef production outlook. Pork, on the other hand, we got we're incorporating the hogs and pigs report from December 23rd. For 2025, it showed a larger pig crop, so that is reflecting that increase there, 110 million pounds for 2025. And then into 2026, a pretty big increase there, 740 million pounds. And again, reflecting back on that hogs and pigs report, higher farrowing intentions in implying larger hog and pork production into this year. Broilers and turkey, just truing up to the most recent production and hatchery data there. Not a whole lot of stories for 2026. Broiler production raised a bit, mainly in the second half of this calendar year, and turkey production up. That's an adjustment just to this first quarter of 2026. Product prices or livestock prices, steer prices. So for 2025, those are going to be our final price estimates for hogs, steers, broilers, and turkeys. So just reflecting most recent data, finishing off that year. Hogs continue to see fairly strong demand. You see that we didn't change the hog price for 2026 this month, despite that increase in hog production and pork production. So relatively strong demand supporting prices there. And for steers into 2026, up 75 cents per hundredweight. Again, recent price strength and lower anticipated marketings into 2026, keeping those supplies tight, prices high. For broilers, not much there to talk about, but turkey prices we raised for both 2025 and 2026. We're seeing relatively tight supplies, especially reflecting recent HPAI outbreaks. And so those tight supplies are continuing into 2026, supporting some price strength there. As you can see, nearly 17 cents per pound year over year. Higher turkey prices raised 10 cents per pound just this month. In terms of U.S. meat trade, one kind of important piece of background data or background information I'm going to point out here, especially regarding beef trade. As you might be aware, China imposed some new import quotas on beef based on anti-dumping allegations, and that mainly reflects lower imports by China from supplies from Brazil and Australia, Oceania in particular, Oceania in general. So that means more global supplies of beef from Brazil and Australia, which for the U.S. means higher imports and more export competition, so lower exports. So U.S. beef exports for 2025 down 18 million pounds. For 2025, that's really just reflecting most recent November data. And for 2026, that is reflecting more competition from Brazil and Oceania. And then beef imports, we raised for both 2025 and 2026. Again, tight supplies in the U.S. and more competing supplies globally supporting that higher import forecast. Pork exports for 2025, across all of 2025, we're just adjusting here to the most recent trade data. This is data through November. And then for 2026, we raised our pork export forecast 65 million pounds. And a few things driving that: higher production in the U.S., as I just noted on the last slide. We're more competitive against Brazil in pork based on exchange rates in particular. And we've also seen some African swine fever in Spain, which is a major major export competitor. So all of those factors are aligning to support the outlook for US pork exports. And finally, dairy. US milk supply and demand, no change in production for 2025. Although milk production per cow raised both years, 2025 and 2026. And we're starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in the rate of growth of the herd, but that milk per cow more than offsetting to hold production unchanged for 2025 and a slight increase for 2026. In terms of product trade, the main story here is especially for fat basis exports. Fat basis exports, we raised 2 billion pounds. That is mainly higher US exports of butter, some cheese as well, but US prices have been declining, giving us some supporting our competitiveness globally. And all of our product prices have been declining to some degree, but we're starting to see some and anticipating a lot more export strength in butter. In terms of skim solids basis, on the other hand, protein demand in the US has been strong. So whey exports are down, our export forecast lowered in both 2025 and 2026 as strong domestic demand is keeping more of that product in the US. And dairy product prices here, again, just kind of truing up to recent data. For 2025, all of those product price data points are final. So final data for 2025 for everything except the all milk price. That's not quite final. We should have that wrapped up next month. For 2026, cheese and butter prices down this month, also reflecting lower global prices. We've been seeing domestic prices trending lower as well. We're producing a lot of milk fat in the US, reflecting both higher milk per cow and high fat tests. So that is putting some pressure on cheese and butter fat basis products. Protein basis products, on the other hand, non-fat dry milk and dry whey, seeing a little bit of strength there, reflecting strong domestic demand for protein. And then in terms of dairy product prices, the class prices, class 3 price down 70 cents per hundredweight this month as lower cheese prices more than offset higher whey prices. Class 4 up 5 cents per hundredweight as higher non-fat dry milk price more than offsets lower butter prices. And the all milk price reduced 50 cents per hundredweight this month, down to $18.25 per hundredweight. And at these prices, it increases to some degree the likelihood that we're going to see some dairy margin protection payments in the first half of this year. And I know we threw a lot of information at you, and I'm going to wrap things up here, open it up to your questions, and thank everyone for attending, and folks online as well, and we will see you